What happens when a black woman searching for her purse is cuffed by a cop who's already judged her guilty? You won't believe how her one phone call flips the script and leaves the precinct scrambling. Hey folks, help me hit my first 100 subscribers. Subscribe, share with friends, and let's create awesome content together. You ever have one of those days where you're just trying to do something simple, like, say, find your damn purse, and the universe decides to throw you into a full-blown drama? Yeah, that was me, Danielle Lawson, standing in a scorching parking lot, sweat dripping down my face like I was auditioning for a role in Hell's Kitchen. The sun was beating down on that asphalt like it had a personal vendetta, and there I was, bent over the front seat of my black SUV, digging through a pile of receipts, old gum wrappers, and God knows what else, trying to locate my purse. My wallet, my ID, my entire life was in that bag, and I was already late for a meeting at the office. You know, the kind of meeting where people start giving you side eye if you roll in 5 minutes past schedule. I'm the state attorney, by the way. Yeah, that state attorney. The one who's spent years clawing her way through law school, courtrooms, and every, you don't belong here, stare to get where I am. And yet, here I was, muttering to myself like a fool, come on, Danielle, where the hell is it? My phone buzzed on the dashboard for the 4th time, another missed call from the office. I didn't even glance at it. Priorities, you know. Purse first, bureaucracy second. Then I heard it, the low rumble of an engine creeping closer. I straightened up just enough to peek over the car door, and wouldn't you know it, a police cruiser was rolling through the lot like it was on a sightseeing tour. The officer behind the wheel locked eyes with me, and I swear, I could feel the judgment radiating off him. I turned back to my car, pretending I didn't notice, but my stomach did that little flip it does when you know trouble's about to knock. I'm a black woman in a parking lot, rummaging through a car. To some folks, that's not a woman looking for her purse, that's a suspect. The cruiser stopped. The door opened. Heavy boots hit the pavement. Hey, a rough voice barked. I froze, my fingers still clutching a crumpled gas receipt. My heart sank, but I wasn't surprised. I've been black in America for 52 years. I know how this game goes. I took a deep breath, straightened up, and turned to face him. Officer Hardface, middle-aged, white, with a scowl that looked like it was carved into his DNA. His uniform was crisp, but he wore his authority like a cheap cologne, overpowering and obnoxious. His hand rested on his belt, eyes narrowing as he sized me up like I was the star of his personal crime show. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and forced a smile, the kind you use when you're trying not to lose your entire mind. "Looking for my purse," I said, keeping my tone even. "Misplaced it in my car." He didn't blink. "You got ID on you?" I blinked. Did this man not hear me? "Like I said, my purse is missing." "That's what I'm looking for." "My ID's in there." His scowl deepened, like I'd just confessed to robbing a bank. "Aha. Step away from the vehicle." "Oh, here we go." I bit my tongue, hard, because the last thing I needed was this escalating into a full-blown situation. "This is my car," I said, slow and clear, like I was talking to a child. "I'm just trying to find my purse so I can get to a meeting." He wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on me, suspicion dripping from every pore. "Lady, you're acting real suspicious. You expect me to believe you just lost your purse in this car?" He glanced at my SUV like it was stolen property. I felt my patience fraying like a cheap weave. "Yes, it's my car," I said, my voice firmer now. "I'm the state attorney. I lost my purse. That's why I'm searching for it." He raised an eyebrow, and I swear, a mocking smile crept onto his face. "State attorney, huh? You got any proof of that? Because right now, all I see is someone breaking into a car." My jaw tightened. This man was testing every ounce of my self-control. "I told you, my ID is in my purse, I said, fighting to keep the frustration out of my voice. He took a step closer, his hand now resting on his holster. Yeah, sure. Step away from the vehicle. Now. I opened my mouth to argue, but I stopped myself. I knew how this looked, a black woman, alone, digging through a car without ID. I knew how people like this officer saw me. And I knew arguing would only make it worse. With a deep breath, I stepped back, my mind racing to figure out how to handle this without letting it spiral out of control. What happened next? Oh, it got worse. Way worse. Stick around, because this is about to get real. I stood there, hands raised slightly to show I wasn't a threat, while Officer Hardface circled my car like he was Sherlock Holmes on a bad day. He peered inside, probably hoping to find a ski mask or a crowbar to justify his little power trip. My purse was somewhere in that car, but I was the one being treated like I'd just pulled off the heist of the century. The audacity of it all would have been funny if it wasn't so infuriating. Hands where I can see, he ordered, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. My eyes widened. Was this man serious? Wait, what? I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. I told you, this is my car. He wasn't listening. He stepped forward, grabbing my arm with one hand and snapping the cuffs on with the other. The cold metal bit into my wrists, and I felt a surge of anger so hot it could have melted the asphalt. You're under arrest, he said, his voice cold as ice. Suspicion of vehicle theft. I couldn't believe it. Vehicle theft. My own damn car. I cast one last look at my SUV as he led me toward the patrol car, frustration and disbelief churning in my chest. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a man who'd already decided who I was the second he saw me. In the back of the patrol car, the seat was hard, the air stale, and the whole place smelled like regret and bad decisions. I leaned my head back, trying to calm the storm in my mind. This wasn't how my day was supposed to go. I was supposed to be in a meeting, signing papers, doing my job, not sitting here like some common criminal. Through the window, I saw Officer Hardface, let's call him Officer Mulligan, because that's the kind of name you give a man who's about to fumble his entire career, peering into my car with a flashlight, even though the sun was still blazing. The man was committed to his nonsense, I'll give him that. A couple of people walked by the lot, staring at me in the back of the cruiser. Their faces tightened, but nobody stopped. Nobody asked what was going on. Just another day in America, right? I sighed and glanced around the empty lot, wondering how long this circus was gonna last. The door opened, and Mulligan reappeared, his face set in a grim frown. Still no ID, he said, like I was supposed to magically produce it from thin air. I told you, I said, my voice clipped, my purse is in my car. If you'd let me get it, I could show you everything you need. He shook his head, ignoring me completely. You expect me to believe you're just some law-abiding citizen who lost her purse? Come on. You're trying to steal that car. It's obvious. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. Look, officer, I said, forcing the words out, I'm the state attorney. That's my car. If you just check the registration or run a background check, you'll see everything's in order. Mulligan let out a short, mocking laugh. State attorney? Lady, you can't be serious. People like you don't get jobs like that. Stop lying, and maybe this'll go easier for you. My jaw tightened. People like me? Oh, he was showing his whole hand now. What exactly do you mean by that? I asked, my voice sharp enough to cut through his BS. He leaned in closer, sneering. What I mean is, you're making this harder than it needs to be. You should have thought of a better story. State attorney? He scoffed. I've heard worse, but that's up there. I stared at him, my patience hanging by a thread. I'd spent my whole life fighting against people like him, people who looked at me and saw a stereotype instead of a person. Law school, courtrooms, every step of my career, I'd had to prove myself over and over. And now, standing here, handcuffed for no damn reason, all that frustration was bubbling up like a volcano ready to erupt. This is ridiculous, I muttered, more to myself than to him. Oh, it's ridiculous, all right, Mulligan said, waving another officer over. You think you can just waltz in here, steal a car, and get away with it because you've got some fancy job title in your head? No way. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. Why won't you just run the plates? He shot me an irritated look. Why? So you can buy yourself more time. I know your type. You probably got a record. You think you're smarter than me, but you're not. I had to bite back a retort. This man wasn't interested in the truth. He'd made up his mind the second he saw me, and nothing I said was gonna change that. This is the part where it gets real messy. You're not gonna believe what this fool did next. Keep reading. So there I was, sitting in the back of Mulligan's patrol car, wrists aching from the cuffs, my mind racing like it was training for the Olympics. This wasn't just about a lost purse anymore. This was about a system that lets clowns like Mulligan run around playing judge, jury, and executioner without so much as a Google search. The man hadn't even checked my plates. Not a single background check. Just his assumptions, his biases, and a whole lot of nerve. We pulled into the central precinct, and let me tell you, walking into a police station in handcuffs is a special kind of humiliation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the air smelled like coffee and despair, and every officer we passed gave me that quick glance, the one that says, "Oh, another one." I'm the state attorney, for God's sake. I've been in these stations 100 times, but always on the other side of the desk. Now I was the one being marched in like I just knocked over a liquor store. Mulligan shoved me into a holding cell, the kind with a hard plastic chair and walls that look like they've seen too many bad days. He didn't bother taking the cuffs off, just left me there to stew. I leaned back, trying to ignore the ache in my wrists, and replayed the whole mess in my head. Mulligan's sneering face, his refusal to listen, his little jab about people like you. It wasn't just ignorance, it was malice. He didn't care who I was. He saw a black woman and decided I was guilty. End of story. Across the room, Mulligan was filling out paperwork, muttering to another officer who kept glancing my way. There was no urgency in their movements, no hint that they might have made a mistake. Just another day at the office for them. I couldn't take it anymore. Hey! I called out, my voice echoing in the cell. Can I at least get these cuffs off? You know this is unnecessary. Mulligan didn't even look up. Yeah, sure. You just sit tight, and we'll get to that when we're ready, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I sighed, my frustration boiling over. I'd dealt with difficult officers before, but none as openly hostile as this. How was this happening? I'm the state attorney. I shouldn't be here, cuffed like a criminal, just because some cop decided to play Dirty Harry. After what felt like forever, Mulligan strolled over, leaning down with his hands on the table in front of me. His smirk was still there, smug as ever. All right, state attorney, he said, mocking every syllable. You ready to come clean yet? I looked him dead in the eye. I've told you the truth from the beginning. I'm the state attorney for this city, and you've made a huge mistake. But you're too wrapped up in your own bias to realize that. He chuckled, like I'd just told a bad joke. Bias? Lady, this isn't about bias. This is about you not having any proof, acting all suspicious, and giving me a bunch of excuses. You know how many times I've heard people say they've lost their ID? Happens all the time. You're not special. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. If you just run a background check or check the plates, you'd know everything you need to. This could have been over by now. He straightened up, shaking his head. Background check. Plates. Nah, you don't get to tell me how to do my job. You criminals always think you know better. My hands tensed in the cuffs, but I didn't take the bait. You don't know who you're dealing with, I said, my voice low but firm. When this is over, you're gonna regret how you handled this. He raised an eyebrow, that smirk still plastered on his face. Is that so? What, you think you're gonna scare me, lady? I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen it all. And trust me, whatever little power trip you're on isn't gonna work here. I didn't respond. There was no point. This man was a brick wall, and I wasn't about to waste my energy banging my head against it. I just needed to get out of here and let the truth do the talking. This is where it hits the fan. You're not gonna want to miss what happens when the truth comes knocking. Time dragged in that holding cell, each minute feeling like a personal insult. Officers walked by, phones rang, and the hum of the precinct went on like I wasn't even there. Nobody bothered to check my story. Nobody cared. I was just another face in the system, another box to check. It was infuriating, but I wasn't surprised. I've seen this movie before, and it never ends well for folks who look like me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mulligan strolled back over, his grin as wide as ever. All right, princess. You want your phone call? You got it. Let's see what kind of favors you can call in. I didn't respond. I just stood up as he uncuffed me, flexing my sore wrists and walking over to the phone. It was an old landline, the kind that looks like it's been there since the Reagan administration. I picked up the receiver and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered. Mark Edwards. Mark, it's Danielle, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him sitting up straighter. Danielle? Where are you? I've been trying to reach you. I'm at the police station, I said, glancing at Mulligan, who was leaning against the wall, watching me with that same smug smile. I was arrested. Arrested? Mark's voice was sharp with disbelief. For what? I kept my eyes on Mulligan. They think I was trying to steal my own car, I said, dry as dust. There was a brief silence, then Mark sighed. Which station are you at? Central Precinct, I replied. And I need you down here as soon as possible. I'm on my way, Mark said, his voice all business. Don't say anything else. I'll handle it. I hung up, my fingers tight around the receiver for a moment before I set it down. I turned to face Mulligan, who raised an eyebrow. So, who's coming to save you? He asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Your lawyer. Yes, I said simply, my voice steady. He pushed himself off the wall and took a step toward me, his eyes narrowing. You know, you've got a real attitude for someone in your position. Most people would be grateful to get a phone call, but you. You think you're special, don't you? I looked him dead in the eye, my expression unreadable. I don't think I'm special, I said. But I do think you're making a mistake. He chuckled, shaking his head. Sure. I'll believe that when I see it. He turned and walked out, leaving me standing alone. I sat back down, my mind racing. Mark was on his way, and that gave me some relief. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was one of the best, and we'd worked together on enough cases for me to know he'd handle this. But the fact that it had come to this at all. That was a fire in my chest that wasn't going out anytime soon. Mark's about to walk in, and let me tell you, it's gonna be a reckoning. You don't want to miss this. I sat in that drab interrogation room, the gray walls and harsh fluorescent lights doing their best to make me feel like I was in a low-budget crime drama. But I wasn't about to let this place break me. I'd fought too hard, for too long, to let one arrogant cop's nonsense take me down. I just had to wait for Mark, and then this whole mess would start unraveling. The door swung open, and there he was, Mark Edwards, tall, lean, and dressed in a gray suit so sharp it could cut glass. His expression was tight, his eyes scanning the room like he was already building a case in his head. He spotted me and nodded, his voice low but calm. "Danielle. You all right?" I stood up, nodding. "I'm fine. But we need to deal with this now." Mark turned to the officer who'd followed him in, a younger guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I want to speak to whoever's in charge here. Immediately." The officer shifted uncomfortably. I'll get someone," he mumbled, disappearing down the hall. Mark turned back to me, his jaw tight. "They didn't even check your ID?" "No," I said, my voice tight. "They arrested me without doing any kind of background check. Just took me in based on Mulligan's assumptions." Mark's fists clenched at his sides. "This is completely unacceptable. Don't say anything else. I'll take care of it." We didn't have to wait long. Mulligan strutted back in, his cocky demeanor slipping just a bit when he saw Mark standing next to me. He paused in the doorway, sizing Mark up. "You must be the lawyer," he said, his tone still flippant, though there was a hint of uncertainty now. "That's right," Mark said smoothly. "And I'm here to inform you that you've made a grave mistake. You arrested the state attorney without cause, failed to perform even basic checks, and violated her rights. I'm here to see that this is rectified immediately." Mulligan's smirk faltered, but he tried to play it off. "State attorney, huh? That's the story she's been sticking to." Mark took a step forward, his eyes cold. "It's not a story. It's a fact. And if you don't take this seriously, you'll be dealing with a lawsuit so fast your head will spin." Mulligan's face darkened. "You're telling me she's really—" "Yes," Mark interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "She's the state attorney, and you've made a monumental error." For the first time, I saw doubt creep into Mulligan's expression. He shifted on his feet, glancing between me and Mark, clearly unsure of what to do next. "Well, maybe if she'd told me that sooner." "She did," Mark snapped. "And you didn't listen. Now you're going to fix this, or I'm going straight to the police chief." Mulligan stood there, frozen, then muttered something under his breath and stormed out. I turned to Mark, my expression grateful but still tense. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded, his face softening slightly. "This isn't over yet. Let's make sure they release you properly, and then we'll deal with the rest. This is the moment it all flips. You're gonna love seeing Mulligan eat his words. Keep going." I was back in the interrogation room, hands on the metal table, the cold air pressing down on me. But my frustration was starting to fade. Mark was handling things, and I knew it was only a matter of time before this whole mess came crashing down on Mulligan's head. The door creaked open, and there he was, his usual swagger dialed down a notch. He didn't meet my eyes, just leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, trying to hold on to that smirk. A few moments later, Mark walked in, followed by the police sergeant, a tall, broad man with graying hair and a tired expression. The sergeant scanned the room, his eyes landing on me before turning to Mulligan. He cleared his throat, his voice firm. "All right, let's get to the bottom of this. Miss Lawson, you've been detained under suspicion of vehicle theft. Is that correct?" "Yes," I said, my voice calm but controlled. "But I've explained multiple times that I'm the state attorney for this city, and this is my vehicle." Officer Mulligan refused to check my ID or verify any of my information. The sergeant turned to Mulligan, his expression hardening. "Mulligan, is that true? You didn't check her ID?" Mulligan shifted uncomfortably but kept his defensive posture. "She said she didn't have her ID. She lost her purse." I followed protocol based on the situation. Mark stepped forward, his voice steady and authoritative. "You didn't follow protocol, Officer Mulligan. You failed to run her plates. You failed to perform any sort of background check. You ignored every piece of information she provided, including the fact that she's the state attorney. Instead, you profiled her and escalated a situation that didn't need escalation. Mulligan clenched his jaw, his face reddening. She didn't have proof on her. I can't just take people at their word. We deal with liars all the time. The sergeant held up a hand, silencing him. That's enough. The issue isn't whether she had ID on her at the time. It's how you handled this from the start. Did you or did you not verify her identity through any other means? Mulligan looked away, clearly uncomfortable. No, he muttered. I watched the exchange, my frustration simmering under my calm exterior. I'd given this man every chance to check my information, but he hadn't cared. Now he was finally being called out for it. Mark's voice rose slightly. And when I arrived, you still refused to acknowledge who she was. You continued to mock her and dismissed my explanation outright. You're not just negligent, Officer Mulligan. You're reckless. The sergeant's eyes narrowed at Mulligan, who was now standing with his arms crossed, his face hardening in defense. You need to learn how to handle these situations properly, the sergeant said. This isn't about catching people in lies. It's about doing your job thoroughly. You didn't do that, and now we've detained the state attorney under false charges. Mulligan scowled, but there was no denying the shift in the room. He was no longer in control, and everyone knew it. I was doing my job, he muttered, his voice quieter now. I finally spoke up, my voice cold and measured. No, you weren't. You were abusing your power. You saw me and made a judgment without any evidence. You ignored everything I said because you didn't believe someone like me could hold a position like mine. Mulligan's eyes snapped to mine, anger flickering across his face, but he stayed quiet. The sergeant sighed and turned back to me. Miss Lawson, on behalf of this department, I apologize for the way this was handled. We will release you immediately, and this will be thoroughly reviewed. My eyes stayed on Mulligan as I spoke, my voice unwavering. I appreciate that, but this isn't over. There will be consequences, not just for me, but for every person who's been treated this way and hasn't had the power to fight back. The room went silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. The sergeant nodded solemnly. Understood. I'll see to it personally that this is addressed. Mark placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, and I stood up, ready to leave. But as I walked toward the door, I turned one last time to face Mulligan. You should have listened when I told you who I was, I said quietly but firmly. Next time, maybe you'll think twice before you judge someone based on nothing but your own assumptions. This is just the beginning. The real fight's coming, and it's gonna be epic. Stay with me. Mulligan didn't respond, but his jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. He was still clinging to his pride, even as the truth stared him down. I walked out of the room with Mark by my side, feeling a cold satisfaction. Justice was in my hands now, but I knew this wasn't the end. There were bigger battles to fight, and this was just the warm-up. The next morning, I was back at the police station, but this time, I wasn't in cuffs. I walked in with my head high, my heels clicking against the linoleum like a warning shot. Today, I was the state attorney, and I was here to make sure Mulligan faced the music. The events of yesterday still burned in my chest, but I'd pushed them aside, focusing on what needed to be done. In the meeting room, Chief David Hernandez waited at the head of the table, his serious expression giving nothing away. Mulligan was seated to the side, looking like a man who just realized he'd bet on the wrong horse. His posture was tense, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. When I walked in, he glanced up, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face before he masked it with that same hardened stare. I nodded curtly at Chief Hernandez and sat down across from Mulligan. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on, but I was calm, collected. I knew what needed to be said, and I wasn't letting this man off the hook. Chief Hernandez cleared his throat. Miss Lawson, I want to first offer a formal apology on behalf of the department for what occurred yesterday. I've reviewed the situation, and it's clear that proper procedure wasn't followed. I assure you, this will be dealt with seriously. I met his gaze, my face unreadable. I appreciate the apology, Chief, but apologies don't change what happened. Your officer racially profiled me, refused to verify my identity, and escalated the situation unnecessarily. Mulligan shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, staring straight ahead like he could avoid this by sheer willpower. Chief Hernandez glanced at him before continuing. I understand, and I agree that Officer Mulligan's actions were unacceptable. That's why we're placing him on leave without pay, pending a full investigation. I nodded slowly, but my eyes stayed on Mulligan. That's a start, but this isn't just about me. It's about how many people like me get treated the same way and don't have the power to defend themselves. How many people have been in this exact situation but didn't have someone like Mark Edwards to call or a title like mine to pull them out? Mulligan shifted again, his discomfort growing. He finally spoke, his voice low and defensive. Look, I didn't know who you were, okay? If I'd known, things would have gone differently. I raised an eyebrow, my voice sharp. That's the problem, Officer Mulligan. You shouldn't treat people differently based on who they are. You should have followed procedure, regardless of my position. But you didn't. You saw a black woman rummaging through a car and assumed the worst. Mulligan opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling to respond. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a simmering frustration he couldn't express in front of his boss. Chief Hernandez stepped in, his tone firm. Officer Mulligan, you were in the wrong, and this investigation will determine the consequences of your actions. You need to understand the gravity of this situation. I wasn't done. You should be sorry for what you did, I said, my voice cold. Not just because you did it to me, but because you did it at all. Mulligan glanced at me, his face tight with barely controlled frustration. I wasn't trying to. I'm not interested in excuses, I interrupted. What you did was wrong, and now you're going to face the consequences. This is where the tables turn for good. You're not gonna believe what happens next. A few days later, I was back in the chief's office, Mark by my side. The air was heavier this time, the stakes higher. The investigation had moved fast, and now it was time to lay it all bare. Chief Hernandez sat behind his desk, his expression serious but unreadable. Mulligan was in the corner, looking like a man who just realized the ground was crumbling beneath him. Hernandez nodded to us. Miss Lawson, Mr. Edwards, we've completed our preliminary investigation, and we've come to a decision. Officer Mulligan's actions were not only out of line but directly violated department procedures. We've decided to terminate his employment, effective immediately. Mulligan's face stiffened, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't speak. There was nothing left for him to say. I glanced at him, but my focus stayed on the chief. I appreciate that the department took this seriously, I said, my voice calm. Firing Officer Mulligan, while necessary, isn't enough to address the bigger issue. Hernandez nodded slowly. I agree. That's why we're initiating a department-wide review of our training practices, particularly concerning racial profiling and escalation protocols. This won't be just a check-the-box exercise. We'll be working with external consultants to ensure every officer understands the gravity of situations like this. I leaned forward, my eyes sharp. That's a start, Chief, but I want to be clear. This is about more than training. This is about changing the culture of how your officers approach situations like mine. It's about ensuring that people of color aren't automatically seen as criminals just because they don't fit a certain image. I want to see real changes, not just on paper, but in the way your officers interact with the community. Hernandez met my gaze, his expression serious. I understand, Miss Lawson, and I can assure you we're committed to making those changes. This incident has highlighted deep issues within the department, and we won't let it go unaddressed. Mark cleared his throat. We'll be keeping a close eye on the department's progress, he said smoothly. And if we find that the necessary changes aren't being implemented, we'll be back to ensure accountability is enforced. Hernandez nodded, his expression grim. I understand. I'll make sure you're kept updated on our progress. I turned to Mulligan, who sat stiffly, his gaze fixed on the floor. Mulligan, I said, my voice steady, you had a choice that day. You could have done your job properly, checked the facts. Instead, you chose to act on your prejudices. You assumed I was guilty because of how I looked, and you escalated the situation because you thought you had the power to do so. Now you're facing the consequences of that choice. Mulligan finally looked up, his face pale, resentment flickering in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I didn't need his response. I'd said what I needed to say. Chief Hernandez cleared his throat. Officer Mulligan, you are dismissed. You can collect your things before leaving the premises. Mulligan stood slowly, his body tense, and walked out without another word. As the door clicked shut, the room seemed to exhale. I turned back to the chief. I'll be following this closely, Chief Hernandez. I'm glad to see the department taking action, but I'll be watching to make sure this isn't just a temporary fix. He nodded. I understand, Miss Lawson, and I welcome your oversight. We all want the same thing here, justice and accountability. I stood, Mark rising beside me. Before leaving, I paused and turned back to the chief one last time. I hope you mean that, I said quietly, because this is just one officer, one incident. The system is still broken, and it's gonna take more than firing someone to fix it. The system's on notice now, and I'm not done. You're gonna want to see how this fight ends. A week later, I sat in my office, staring out at the city below. The noise of the streets barely registered. Mulligan was gone, but the weight of what happened still lingered. It wasn't a victory, not really. The system that let him operate unchecked was still there, and I wasn't about to rest until real change was in motion. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Chief Hernandez. I picked up, bracing myself. Danielle Lawson. Miss Lawson, it's Chief Hernandez, he said, his tone formal but relaxed. I wanted to update you on the internal reforms we've started. The department has begun implementing new training protocols. The consultants are working with us to ensure racial profiling and escalation training is thorough. And I'd like to offer you a seat on the oversight committee to make sure we're staying on track. I leaned back in my chair, processing his words. I appreciate the offer, Chief. It's a step in the right direction, but I hope this isn't just about making things look good on paper. He paused briefly. I assure you, Miss Lawson, this is about more than appearances. We're committed to making real changes, and your insight would be valuable to the process. I considered his words carefully. I'd seen too many promises of reform fizzle out, too many apologies followed by silence. I'll think about it, I said. I'm not interested in being part of a show. If I join this committee, it's to make sure the work actually gets done, and that it's done right. Understood, Hernandez replied. We'll welcome your participation whenever you're ready. And again, I'm sorry for what happened. It's clear there's a lot of work to be done. I ended the call and stared out the window, the weight of responsibility heavy on my shoulders. Mulligan's firing was a start, but it was just one man in a system that had been failing people like me for years. I thought about the community meetings I'd started organizing, small for now, but growing. People were coming forward with their own stories of mistreatment, stories that echoed mine but without the platform I had. Mulligan wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom. Mark knocked on my door and walked in, his face calm but knowing. Got your message, he said, taking a seat. How are things? I let out a slow breath. Chief Hernandez called. They've started the reforms, and he wants me on the oversight committee. Mark raised an eyebrow. And are you considering it? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to be involved, to make sure they're not just checking boxes. But another part of me is tired of hearing the same promises, tired of fighting the same fight. Mark leaned forward. You've always known this wouldn't be easy. But you're in a unique position, Danielle. You can hold them accountable in a way few others can. I sighed, looking out the window. I know. It's just. I want this to be real, Mark. I don't want to be part of something that's all talk and no action. I want real change. He nodded, his voice soft but firm. Then make it real. Be the one who keeps pushing, who keeps asking the hard questions. You've already started to make a difference, but this is just the beginning. I was quiet for a moment, thinking about the community meetings, the stories I'd heard, people who'd been silenced for too long. I've been organizing community forums, I said. People are starting to come forward. I'm hearing stories that echo what I went through, but most of them don't have the platform I do. If I take this seat on the committee, I want to bring those voices with me. It's the only way to make sure this isn't just about me. Mark smiled faintly. Then do it. If anyone can bring those voices to the table, it's you. I nodded, a sense of clarity settling in. I couldn't let the exhaustion win. There were too many people depending on me, even if they didn't know it yet. The fight was bigger than one officer, one incident. It was about dismantling the biases and systems that had festered for too long. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Chief Hernandez. I'll take the seat on the committee, but understand this, I'm bringing the community with me, and we're not here for half measures. As I hit send, a sense of purpose filled me. The road ahead was long, but I'd never been one to shy away from hard work. This is the fight of a lifetime, and I'm just getting started. You're not gonna want to miss how it all comes together. Mark left, and I stayed at my desk, my focus sharp. The small victories of the past week, Mulligan's firing, the department's promises, were important, but they were just the foundation. The system wouldn't change overnight, but I was determined to tear it down, brick by brick, case by case. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about the work still to come. The community meetings were growing, the stories piling up. Every one of them was a reminder of why I couldn't stop. I'd taken the first step, and there was no turning back now. As the day turned to evening, the quiet satisfaction of knowing progress was in motion let me breathe a little easier. I'd taken on the system, and now I was part of the force that would change it. For the first time in a long time, justice didn't feel like just an ideal, it felt within reach. But the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. There were more battles to come, more voices to lift, more walls to tear down. And I was ready. The system's shaking, and I'm not done yet. This is where the real change begins. Stay with me for the finale.